Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Delphine Salas Alvarez. I am the film curator at FIAF. And on behalf of all of us, I welcome you to the second day of Burning Brighter, New Voices in French Cinema. The festival was conceived in partnership with the Edmond de Rothschild Foundations. And I want to thank Firoz Ladak, the head of the foundation, who came here to New York to be with us for the weekend, as well as Carole Bazomo, who is based in Paris. Thank you for joining us for a discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion, and representation in cinema in France and the US. Just like in the US, questions of social justice, representation, and access have taken more urgency across French society, including the cultural sector and, of course, the film industry. And conversations, debate, and actions are ongoing in both countries. And so the festival, I think, is a good opportunity to take stock of where we stand today on these questions, how things perhaps have evolved, hopefully for the better in the US and France. Is there a greater representation today in the media? If there is, what does it look like? What are the actions and initiatives taken in both countries? And maybe what's the path forward? Where do we go from there? We have a great panel assembled with us today, and I'm really happy to welcome Claire Diao, the co-creator of Burning Brighter, who is calling in from Togo. Hello, Claire. She will be moderating the discussion. Through her writing, her production, and curatorial work, Claire has been a tremendous champion of filmmakers, many of them of color, who often work at the margin of the French film industry, often without formal training and not really big budgets to make films, and then make films anyway. And Claire has been behind them, I think, for a big important part of her career. In 2017, Claire published a book of essays on these filmmakers, maybe the first generation of Double Vague, le nouveau souffle du cinéma français. If you speak French, I encourage you to check it out. It's a great resource of essays and interviews of various filmmakers. Claire also tours films and filmmakers across the world with her program Quartier Lointain. And she's the co-founder of the Pan-African film criticism magazine Awo Télé. And she's the head of the film distribution company Sudu Connections. So in many different ways, she works with these filmmakers. She's currently a member of the selection committee of Directors Fortnight at the Cannes Film Festival. And she's also on the Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival selection committee as well. So thank you so much, Claire, for being with us and working with us on this program. I think I'm going to let you take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delphine, and thank you for the opportunity to co-curate with you this Burning Brighter program. I hope you will enjoy during the weekend and the entire week. And thanks to all our speakers to attend today from the different places this session. Thank you also to our interpreter, Nicolas Elliott, who will be translating Mr. Yassine Qnia, who's the only speaker who will speak in French. So we are here to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion in cinema, especially in the United States and in France. And I think that will be really interesting with your different points of view. The film industry has been marked by many changes during this 21st century. Struggles to have more diversity and inclusion of minorities behind and in front of the camera have changed, and streaming services have definitely played a part. In 2021, in the United States, Netflix's most popular series were Bridgerton, 82 million views, produced by Shonda Rhimes, and Lupin, 76 million views, starring the French actor Omar Sy. In 2020 in France, the hip-hop TV series All the Way Up, Validé, directed by Franck Gastambide, scored more than 20 million viewers during the lockdown, while the almost 100 Black actors cast movie Simply Black, directed by Jean-Pascal Zadi, became a summer hit when the movie theaters reopened. In 2017, when I published my essay Double Vague, A New Breath for French Cinema, none of them had the success they have today. In 2021, various women were awarded at the most prestigious film festivals and ceremonies. Sian Heder won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance with Coda. Chloé Zhao won the Oscar for Best Director with Nomadland. Alice Diop won the Best Documentary Award at the Berlinale with Us. Julia Ducournau won the Palme d'Or in Cannes with Titan. Antonetta Alamat Kuzijanovic won the Camera d'Or with Marina, while Audrey Diwan won the Golden Leo at the Venice Film Festival with L'Événement. Social classes, skin color, gender, while great activists such as Melvin Van Peebles in the US and Med Hondo in France have left us, it is time to think about the evolution of inclusion or rejection in our societies. Did the Me Too protest followed by the Black Lives Matter movement and the birth of platforms such as Netflix and Disney influence the American film industry? Did the 2005 suburban revels and the Balance ton port movement forced the French cinema industry to open its doors? If Chris Rock's speech promoting Black talents at the 2016 Oscar ceremony was praised, why have Calix Begala and Luc de Satellois been disappeared from the French cinema industry after the speech requesting the same things at the 20,000 French César ceremony? Is it a question of time or a question of society? Is the rise of non-white film professionals, female leaders, and non-binary actors finally getting accepted? Or is it just a quota trick to let everyone feel represented? Are people successful because they are or because they do? Would it be possible for the film industry to go backwards, or are we really stepping into a new world? To discuss these topics, I'm happy to share the mic with today's speakers. Laurence Lascary is a producer based in France, founder of the L'Autre Côté du Périph' company that produces films from working class neighborhoods and underserved population. She is also the co-president of the French Collectif 50/50 that advocates for a more inclusive representation of women in the film industry. Melissa Silverstein is based in the United States, founder and publisher of Women and Hollywood, an initiative and website that advocates for gender diversity and inclusion in Hollywood and the global film industry. She launched in 2020 the Girls Club, a community for women creatives, culture changers, and storytellers. Yasmina F. Edwards is a talent manager based in the United States. Founder of the EGMY agency, she is launching a new company, YFE Agency, in order to support French-speaking entrepreneurs and startup luxury brands in early stages of development in getting established in the North American market. Yassine Qnia is a filmmaker based in France. He will present tonight at 7:30 p.m. as a North American premiere his first feature, A Brighter Tomorrow, which premiered at the 2021 Cannes Directors Fortnight. His previous award-winning shorts, Fait Croquer, Maudit, and F430 have been all shot in his city, Aubervilliers, in the Parisian suburbs. Don't forget that you can ask questions through the Zoom chat and through the facilitator in the theater. And a big thank you again to Nicholas Elliott for the translation. Melissa Silverstein, let's start with Women in Hollywood because it was created back in 2007, sorry. What is the place of women nowadays in the US film industry?
Hi, thanks for having me. I think it's better. I mean, there wasn't a lot to go backwards. So clearly people now understand that women are a market, which was always kind of the challenge, making people understand that women bought tickets and that women's content would bring people to the theaters. And I think that now women directors, as well as other creatives, have proven themselves to be successful at the largest, at the top level of the business. And so that has helped kind of cement the conversation that, you know, women belong in the business at the top tiers. The problem is still about access, continuing to get hired, and opportunities. And there is still a lot of stigma on female content as not being important enough to center in the culture. But I do think that people they can't put their heads in the sand anymore. It's like you can't just ignore the women. That happened many years. in Hollywood and at film festivals across the globe. And so that's a positive change.
And how did the Me Too movement change maybe the film industry?
I think it changed everything. I think it changed everything everywhere. And also the Black Lives Matter movement. It basically shook the foundation. So everything became off kilter. So it's like nothing was straight anymore. And while of course there are people in power who would be really happy to go backwards and to, live the life pre-2017 or pre-2000, want to like live in the 50s or things like that, that's not possible anymore. In particular, because of social media and how people are connected to each other and how people challenge the powerful. And so I think that, people keep waiting for Me Too to go away. And every time people feel like, oh, it's, going away, another huge thing happens. So I think that it's here to stay. I think that you see the challenges that are happening at all levels of the culture, whether it's sport. We're dealing with a huge sports issue here in the United States now with our Women's Professional Football League, about protecting women. And whether it's on sets now where people want to be protected and treated as human, whether there's going to be a big strike now about, humane working conditions now with IATSE. So there's a lot of challenges happening now that probably hadn't happened before. And I look forward to seeing how they get resolved.
We used to make the joke that France is always 10 years behind the United States. So back in 2018, in France, there was the launch of the Collectif 50-50. So I will ask my question now in French and English for Yassine as well. Le Collectif 50-50 a été créé en 2018. Qu'est-ce que ce collectif a changé dans le paysage cinématographique français? So the collective was launched in 2018. What did this organization change in the French cinema landscape? Laurence.
Thank you, Claire. First of all, I would like to precise that our name might be misleading, but the Collectif 50-50 advocate for gender equality and inclusion in the film industry. The thing is that we are taking the problems one after another, and we started with this powerful statement following the Weinstein story, if I can say so, and the Me Too movement. We decided that we wanted to use this momentum to question the distribution of power in the industry, because in France, it can be tricky to address the patriarchal and the discrimination, racism, and all those topics. And our philosophy is that if you want to change, if you want to obtain systemic change, then you'll have to look into the distribution of power, because this is where all starts. When it comes to harassment and sexual violences, it starts with unequal repartition of power, distribution of power. So we started in 2018 with this strong statement, 82 women climbing the stairs of the Cannes Film Festival as a symbol of the 82 women that had a film selected in the competition since the beginning of the Cannes Film Festival, compared to 1645 men in competition. And only 2 women won the Palme d'Or. One was an honorary celebration, Agnès Varda, and the other one was ex aequo, Jane Campion with Quentin Tarantino. So what does it mean? So this action was to question the Cannes as a symbol of all festival and of all recognition of women and the invisibilization of women. Because what does it mean? Does it mean that the women that are not selected are less talented? So that's the question we asked. And at the same time, so this was the visible part of the action. And we also asked the head of all section of the Cannes Film Festivals to sign a pledge in which they commit to more transparency. Who are the members of the committee selections, for instance. Also, we asked them to give us data regarding the number of films submitted by women in their selection and the number of films that were actually selected. Because most of when we discuss gender parity, because this topic is not new, actually. If you remember, in 2015, there was also a huge controversy because there were no women in competition, or just two, it was ridiculous. And so they are questioned all the time. And what they say is that, but we're not responsible because we don't receive enough film directed by women. So we say, okay, so give us data and we will monitor whether there is a bias or there is an issue in the selection. And so they did. And we figured out that they are doing pretty good because they received around 20% of film directed by women, and they peak around 23%, which is good. And I think that the signature of this pledge, the monitoring of the data, also the transparency in the committee selection had a strong impact on their organization, because more and more women programmers are being appointed, and it was not the case before. So that's the first thing. And the second one is that the proportion of film directed by women is getting higher and higher. So I think that it was with this pledge, we also raised awareness on this issue, and we were lucky enough to have humble counterparts in front of us that were willing to challenge their practices, and it works. So today, more than 150 festivals have signed the pledge, mostly in France, and it's a good start. So this is one example of what we do at the Collectif.
Thank you very much. Yassine, as a male director, do you feel threatened by all these pledges and quota and maybe the women rise? Yassine, en tant qu'homme réalisateur, est-ce que vous vous sentez menacé par ces chartes, ces quotas, ces femmes qui prennent le pouvoir?
Non, bonjour. Non, je me sens pas du tout menacé. Non, je suis content que ça existe pour les institutions, voilà. Et je suis content aussi que la question se pose parfois des égalités, ou enfin, de la diversité plutôt, parce que je pense qu'on ne sera jamais égal, la vie est injuste de toute manière, en fait. Donc, je ne vois pas pourquoi chercher toujours à essayer de rendre tout égal, tout comme ça. Moi, en tant qu'artiste, ça me fait peur, en fait. Et non, je pense que ces questions, moi, je sais que quand ça a commencé à venir beaucoup sur le devant de la scène, j'ai commencé. Au début, c'était difficile de faire un film, de se faire financer, d'être aidé. Et après, tout a été un peu plus simple. Et après, et même dans les sélections en festival et tout ça, et je me dis, oui, est-ce qu'on me prend pour le film, pour ce qu'il est, ou bien pour un quota? Et du coup, parfois, je vivais pas pleinement la situation comme une fête ou comme quelque chose qui... Mais j'étais toujours dans un truc de politique, donc dans une dualité, contrairement aux films que je regardais auparavant et que j'acceptais tout simplement dans un élan de générosité, en fait. Je ne sais pas comment expliquer ça. J'avais l'impression que avant, voilà, c'était fluide, c'était simple. Et là, on ne sait plus où on est. C'est comme s'il y avait une multitude de petits États. Et j'ai l'impression que même le marché, il aime ça parce que la manière dont voilà, de singulariser une personne, voilà, c'est plus simple après pour lui vendre des choses dans la niche. Donc voilà, il y a des niches voilà, ça c'est pour femmes, ça c'est pour ça, ça c'est pour ça. Et voilà, moi j'ai l'impression que ça m'a plus confondu ma pratique, ou bien même ma pratique de cinéma et même à recevoir les films. C'est devenu plus difficile pour moi, en tant que spectateur. Voilà.
Let Nicholas Elliott make the translation.
Ouais, j'arrive. So, hello. No, not at all. I don't feel threatened by it at all. I'm happy that these kind of things exist as it regards institutions. And I'm also happy about these questions that arise about equality, or to be more specific, about diversity, because I believe that in life, we will never really achieve equality. We're never all equal. And so to speak of equality kind of scares me as an artist, but diversity, yes. And so when these questions eventually came into, when these questions initially came into the foreground and arose, at first, I was starting to make films and it was very difficult, and it became somewhat simpler, somewhat easier to get financing, to get help to make these films. And then even in festivals, I started to ask myself, was I being included for the film or for some kind of quota? So I wasn't fully living the film like a joy or a party. I started to experience it more as a political thing with a kind of a duality. It was unlike, for instance, my relationship when I would watch films beforehand, when I would simply watch them with a momentum or an impulse of generosity. Before, it used to be very fluid, very simple, but now I have the sense that we don't quite know where we are. It's like there's a multitude of small states, and the market likes this too, because it allows the market to singularize or individualize people into different niches, the niches for women, the niche for this, for that. And so in fact, it has confused my practice of cinema, both as a watcher and as a maker of cinema. It has made things harder in a sense.
So I have to jump to our talent manager, Yasmina Edwards. What do you think about what Yassine just said, and comment les talents naviguent entre les différentes tendances dictées par l'industrie du cinéma? How do talents navigate between the film industry trends?
First, thank you for La FIAF, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be part of this conversation, a conversation that actually I've been having for many, many, many years. So when it comes to talent, in my case, I have a bit of a unique path in this business, because I really only started 7 years ago. I'm not that talent manager who's been around forever and who had been having a ton of connection. So I came into the business because I had an opportunity, and I am French and I am Black and I live in the US. So my experience actually was very different. Because I started by bringing French-speaking talent to the US market. That was a bit of, if you can call it, like my niche. And 7 years ago, France was still viewed a little bit as a, how should I put it, Catherine Deneuve, Chanel. We really didn't really see French as someone who looked like me. So there was a bit of a path to change, and the streaming platform were not as popular as they were today. As you say, Claire, when you started, Lupin has been the number one streaming film on Netflix. Well, 7 years ago, when you were French, and maybe even before, and you wanted to do a career in the US, you better make sure you don't have an accent. And the requirements were quite different. But I always believe, because as a talent manager, and because it's my personal story, that there was different type of narratives, and narrative were not just one. And that's what I was selling to either agents here or the different people that I was speaking with. Now, fast forward to 2020 and the social unrest and the pandemic. So obviously a lot of things have changed, and in between, social media has exploded. So obviously there's a lot of more opportunities for talent, not only to play as actors, but most importantly, to create content. And that's what I tell my clients. I said, the game is to create your own content. That's where you have the freedom to tell your own story. And that's actually also how you're able to sustain yourself, because as a talent manager, I looked at the creative aspect, but as I told them, and I tell them all the time, it's a business. And in order to sustain a longevity and have a long career, you need to own your IP, intellectual property. And I think today intellectual property is the grail, and how you were able to create your content and making sure that you own it. And just to end on that topic, because there's been many instances, and I've been part of the conversation, where they were willing to have a talent at a table, to pick her mind, maybe to give her a few pennies because they understand the culture, but they will not give that talent the credit, or they will not put her name at the end of the film. And basically my fight every day in this business is to make sure, especially underrepresented minority, to own our own IP.
I continue the discussion, but please, everyone who follow us, if you want to ask questions, you're free to ask on the chat. And Yasmina, what was...
Oops. It's frozen. That's what happened when you have when you live, and then the Wi-Fi start playing games. And I know Claire is in Togo, so God knows what's happening in Togo. Shout out to Lomé. So I think that to keep the conversation going, what do you think, Melissa? Because you're actually the only American here on this panel, was born in America. Do you think that, you know, in terms of culture and experiences, if things have changed? I don't know, Laurence or Yassine?
I feel that, you know, everybody's using the example of Michaela Cole and her IP, right? And how she walked away from the deal at Netflix because they wanted to just pay her up front. And then she took it to HBO Max, and they, you know, basically let her own her work. And I think the problem that's happening now is that the Netflix model is growing. We buy all your rights up front and you don't have any back end. And that's the price of the world that we're living in now. And also related to television, the writers went on strike, or basically fired all their agents because of the packaging fees. So they, you know, they want to own more of their work and the money now. So like, for example, here in the United States, a television show used to be 22 episodes, and a writer would work on 22 episodes. You get paid by 22 episodes. And now with the streamers is much more condensed. And I'm talking about film and television kind of interchangeably because the world has changed and now they are interchangeable. And so if you're a writer on a television show, now you have 10 weeks, right? So you have to do 2 jobs a year, right? And so these things are really hard to negotiate, and you have no, like, I Love Lucy still makes money. It's 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and that's not going to be the way going forward. So I don't think I've answered the question properly, but I wanted to build on that Netflix piece, is to say that the business is just in flux. It is. And this is an opportunity for people who have, the guts to do things differently, to make their own tables, to make their own rules, to not play by the rules that never worked, that were always false, but now are just, they don't exist. So this is a grand opportunity. I don't think people are going to be making the same amount of money that people made 20 years ago. It's just not going to exist. You're not going to be able to retire at 30 or 40 or whatever, but it's okay.
But the truth is, Claire, I'm not taking over you. We're not taking over it because you froze. So that's why we kind of continue the conversation. But if I just want to add one thing, Melissa, we may not be able to, people may not be able to make money as old Hollywood made money, but it was a very small minority.
Exactly.
We're making money.
Right.
Today, a lot of us can make money. And, I know people who've been launching web series online. So there's different routes. And so that's, but Claire, I'm letting you taking over.
I totally agree with you. And I think that has what's changed is the amount of people who are entering the business, who are able to actually sell things. And now we have to see if they can get made, and then we get to watch them.
Let's be optimistic.
Always.
We already received plenty questions on the chat. So I'm really happy about that. Would the panelists please share the views on the issue of cultural appropriation when it comes to content? Where does artistic license and creativity end and appropriation begin? Laurence, maybe, as a producer?
Yeah, I can answer that. So as a producer myself, I would say that I'm looking for authenticity. And when we are discussing diversity and inclusion, there is a question asked, which is who is being granted the right to tell the stories? And this is the question that one should have in mind when it comes to cultural appropriation, because the narrative, the stories are there. And in France, we have something called liberté de création, freedom of creation, which means that there is something sacred about a filmmaker and the story he wants to tell and how he's going to tell it. The final cut actually goes to the director instead of the producer. That being said, I would say that everybody has the right to tell every stories. But the thing is that when it comes to stories that have been ignored, invisibilized for like ages, forever, why would I choose an author that has nothing to do with the story he wants to tell, instead of choosing the authenticity? So that's the question I'm asking. And with my company, actually, my vision 13 years ago was to give the pen to those like Yassine, the people from minorities who didn't go to the right schools, film schools, and so forth. And there is something very interesting about what Yassine said, is that he he didn't feel good about being the one example that was shown all the time to say, like, look, the system works well. Look, we have Yassine and his marvelous film. Yassine did this film with no money, no grants, and he did it with his pocket money. And I don't know how you produced it, but the film was very low cost. The film was great, but what I want to say is that Yassine was the exception that was put in front to say that the system was working well, because he was able to do this film, but he did the film with any support. And Yassine was the exception, but it doesn't mean that there are not many other gifted people around. And I see many of them all the time. And my company is too small to accompany all of them. So
yeah, I'm gonna ask Yassine as well.
I'm okay with everybody telling any stories, but the thing is that this is also part of the systemic discrimination that I want to fight.
Thanks, Laurence. Yassine, how do you as a filmmaker navigate between the producers and funding expectation and the story you want to tell? Comment faites-vous en tant que cinéaste pour naviguer entre les attentes des producteurs et des fonds de financement et les histoires que vous souhaitez raconter?
J'ai envie de dire plein de choses déjà.
Go on.
La première chose, c'est que par rapport à ta question, depuis que j'ai commencé à faire du cinéma, il n'y a qu'une seule chose que j'écoute, c'est un peu banal, mais c'est mon cœur, ce que j'ai envie de voir moi en tant que spectateur, simplement. Voilà. Maintenant, avec cette pensée-là, il est vrai qu'on se heurte parfois à des attentes, des envies de la part de producteurs ou peut-être des programmateurs en festival qui, eux, ne voient pas le monde dans lequel on vit comme moi je le vois, et en même temps c'est normal, puisque même quand il y a des cinéastes qui sont issus du même milieu socio-culturel que moi, ils ne rendent pas les mêmes choses que moi je vois. C'est mon propre regard. Bon, ça c'est une chose.
Je vais traduire ça. Here I come. Well, there's lots of things that I want to say, but first, regarding your question, since I've started making films, there's one thing that I listen to. It may be a bit banal to say so, but it's my heart. It's what I want to see as a viewer. Now, however, with that thought, you come up against producers and festival programmers who have different expectations and desires, who don't see the world that I live in the same way that I do, which is absolutely normal, in fact, because I see filmmakers coming from similar backgrounds or areas as me who look at things very differently and show them differently because I have my own way of seeing things. That's normal.
Ensuite, pour la question de l'exception que disait Laurence par rapport à moi, bon, il est vrai que parfois, j'étais pris un peu comme un étendard, mais il y a eu des gens avant moi qui ont fait déjà des choses incroyables, comme Alain Gomis, ou Rabah Merzaimesh, ou même avant Mehdi Charef. Donc, il y a des gens comme ça où c'était encore plus difficile à l'époque de faire des choses parce que le numérique n'était pas complètement là, en fait. Donc, c'était encore plus difficile. Et puis, voilà, il y a eu d'autres personnes aussi donc, voilà, qui ont existé. Après, si j'étais peut-être l'exception, un truc comme ça, je pense que ça vient avant tout. Je parlais peut-être parfois un peu la même langue que les institutions parce que avant de vouloir faire du cinéma, je suis arrivé par l'éducation à l'image. Et ça change beaucoup. Ça veut dire que j'étais conscient de l'histoire du cinéma avant de faire les premières choses et donc je parlais à peu près la même langue. Il y avait, et ce que je reproduisais, alors ce que je produisais, c'était une reproduction, mais juste en bas de chez moi, en fait, tout simplement. Donc, il y avait parfois peut-être, je ne sais pas. Je ne peux pas l'expliquer, ça, il faut demander aux institutions, mais moi, c'est l'image que je me fais. C'est plus facile parce que Yassine parle notre langue, peut-être.
Je vais traduire.
Nicolas.
J'arrive. So as for the other question of me perhaps being an exception, as Laurence said, it's true that sometimes I was kind of shown as the shining example, the banner. But it's important to say that there were people who came before me who did incredible things. People like Alain Gomis, Rabat Amer Zaimesh, or before them, Mehdi Charef. So there were people who came before who had an even harder time doing things because they didn't yet have access to digital, for instance. So that's a fact. There were others before who existed. Now, if maybe I indeed was this exception, I think it was perhaps because I spoke the same language as the institutions. Because before I started making films, I came from education to images, a kind of public education to film culture. So before I started making films, I knew film history. And so I spoke the same language. What I think I produced was a reproduction of some of these things, but just downstairs from my apartment, out in front of my house. And so I can't say for certain that this is what happened. You would have to ask the institutions, but I think it was a question of my speaking the same language.
Et j'aimerais juste rajouter, désolé, que cette éducation à l'image est très importante. Pour moi, elle l'a été. C'est comme ça qu'on est arrivé dans les ateliers. À l'époque, je suis arrivé par les ateliers de maisons de jeunes. Voilà. Et il y avait des ateliers de cinéma. Et on nous faisait pas tout de suite utiliser les caméras. Il fallait voir beaucoup de films et parler des films. Et on nous disait à l'époque, voilà, regarde un film de Maurice Pialat, L'amour existe. C'est un film pour toi. On nous disait, regarde Pasolini, Akaton, c'est un film pour toi. Et donc, on a été abreuvés comme ça. Et puis, il y en avait qui, frustrés de ne pas toucher les caméras et de ne pas pouvoir s'exprimer, partaient. Et puis, il y avait les autres qui étaient plus peut-être sensibles à ce qu'ils regardaient, restaient. Et après, ça a donné ça et c'était plus simple. Par contre, aujourd'hui, quand on me dit de refaire des ateliers pour des jeunes, les institutions auxquelles j'ai affaire, ils me disent il faut tout de suite leur donner les caméras. Et je dis pourquoi? Il faut mieux voir des films avant. Et ils me disent non, il faut produire parce que l'intervention qu'on te fait venir, il faut que ça soit rentabilisé par un film, par quelque chose. Il faut qu'on ait quelque chose à montrer tout de suite. Et je pense que c'est un problème. Bon, voilà, je vais juste dire ça et après revenir plus tard si on a le temps, sur l'appropriation culturelle, qui est un très grand débat. Pardon, désolé.
Merci, thank you. Nicolas?
Here I come. So I just want to add that this education to images, this public film education I received is a very important thing. It was very important for me. I had access to workshops through youth centers and specifically film workshops. Now, when I went to these film workshops, we weren't immediately handed a camera. First, we had to watch lots of films and we had to talk about the films. So for instance, I would be told, look at this film by Maurice Pialat, L'amour existe, love exists. That's a film for you. Or look at this film by Pasolini, Acatone. That's a film for you. Some people were frustrated by the fact that they couldn't touch the equipment yet, and so they left. Others were more sensitive, and so they stayed, and that yielded whatever results it may have yielded. However, today, when I'm asked to do workshops for young people, the institutions tell me you have to give them the camera right away. And I say, why? Wouldn't it be better to watch some films first? And they say, no, we need to produce, we need to make the money produce things. We need to see that the money is going somewhere immediately. I think that's a big problem. Regarding the question of appropriation, which is a huge issue, I'll return to that later.
I would like to say something about appropriation, and maybe many of you in the panel will disagree. I think appropriation was a big issue a few years ago when access was limited to very few people. So then they would take credit, and it happened in fashion, when the big brand copy a small African brand, and it took her to send letters. Now we have Twitter. So I'm thinking that if someone is appropriating something, that person will be called out. And what I tell my talent and the way I live my life actually is, if I put something out and it's good and someone copy it because that person is appropriating this thing, I think we'll see it and we'll know what's authentic and what's not. And I personally, I'm not letting that prevent me or prevent my my talents or my work to keep doing what I do, because it's really, I would say that we live in a time where you can tell when someone is actually real and authentic versus not. That's actually my opinion about, cultural appropriation. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, Melissa.
I really think it's the job of the people who might get the gigs, like say there's a problem in documentary world where the white people get to tell the stories of the people of color because they know the white filmmakers, they feel comfortable, funders feel comfortable with them, and they are, basically taking the easy way out because this is what they know. And so it's the job, but it's also very hard for a filmmaker to say, oh, no, I won't do this job. So really what needs to happen is figuring out ways that people get the jobs who are the people who should tell the stories. And what we have seen for a very long time is that the storytellers have always been white people telling the stories of everyone else. And we all know that. And we need to just say it out loud and say that, we've seen the world through white people's eyes. And that's not good. That's not okay. And so what this movement is doing is challenging the white people, also mostly, to say it's time for other people's visions to be centered in our culture. And we have lived with privilege and used the privilege to help see different visions. It's hard. It's very, very hard. I'm not, a Pollyanna here. I'm not, I'm just saying that these are the things that we need to be thinking about and challenging ourselves with on an ongoing basis.
There's another question for you, Melissa, about inclusion. Do you think movements such as Me Too and BLM are necessary to make things change radically in the cinema industry? And do you think the US is acting as a trailblazer in the matter for the international cinema industry?
Well, I guess the answer is yes, because I don't think we saw that much change before the confluence of these movements. And do I think that the U.S. is acting as a trailblazer? Oh, I don't think so. I don't think the U.S. is a trailblazer. I mean, we make films so different here than the rest of the world in terms of the commerciality and the fact that everything is about, money more than it is in other places where you have governmental grants and things like that. And Hollywood, it's basically now the people who make the biggest movies, right, and that are shown all across the globe, that seem to be pushing towards more inclusion. I mean, you got to look at Marvel and say, they're doing an okay job. When Chloe Zhao's movie comes out in 1 month and it makes $1 bazillion, and it's a woman of color directing a hugely inclusive cast, there's like no going back. It's like we hit these milestones and there's no going back. When Patty Jenkins directed Wonder Woman and people were like, oh, a woman can direct this movie, there was no going back. And Chloe Zhao winning the Oscar, right? The second woman. And there's no going back. So it's like you have to build on these milestones. Of course, we're going to have things that, you know, we're going to have backwards moments, but we have to keep pushing forward and challenging and asking these questions. And these are hard things to do. And that's why we just need to keep doing it all the time.
Melissa, as an immigrant who's been living in the US for almost 2 decades, I would slightly disagree with you because probably I am an immigrant. And I truly believe that Hollywood and the United States is really pushing the culture and pushing the social issues. Because what happened with the George Floyd incident, murder last year in the middle of the pandemic has sparkled and has spilled all over the world, and in France particularly, because, you know, it forced people who didn't care whether it was in the US or outside the US to really look at this issue from different lenses. And the level of change that happened, I mean, I'm sure you remember, in terms of putting money, changing things, and making things happen. As a Black woman, I'm having different conversations for the past few months.
Yeah.
And I can feel it. And if it wasn't for the US, and we can there's so many critics we can, you know, share about the US, but in that point, I feel actually that, there's been a lot of changes in social issue and Hollywood has been leading.
That's
Still
great.
a lot of work. Still a lot of work.
Still a lot of work. I mean, that's what I'm really saying is there's still a lot of work. I mean, Laurence and I, you know, we've done stuff together, and France is pretty bad. I mean, let's just say that. And sometimes I go to your festivals and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? And so I, of course, am so immersed. I don't see it as you do, Yasmina. And I'm glad that you think that the US is leading the charge, and I hope it continues.
And it's not perfect. I want to make it clear. It's not perfect, but the push is there. The conversations are happening. So I just want to make sure that people understand that I'm not trying to put roses over everything that's happening here.
Oh yeah, Laurence, please.
There is an initiative I would like to talk about. It's not in the US, it's in Europe. Last year was launched the ARTEF, which is the Anti-Racist Task Force for European Films. And this is a very great initiative gathering institutions as well as organizations representing BIPOC professionals. And this is a very interesting example of a strategy in order to combat racism, first of all, by naming it, which is not quite evident in Europe, especially in France, and also by targeting institutions, because in Europe, the system is very virtuous. We are lucky enough compared to the US to have a very dynamic, independent film industry, production industry, and the institutions are ready to question their practices and to change. And the first announcement was this year in the Cannes Film Festival. Two funds, the Netherlands Film Fund as well as the Swedish Film Institute, they gathered in order to create a fund aiming at filmmakers from minority in order to support their art. Because at the end of the day, this is what we need. We need to support our artists, our filmmakers, and the rest is just, I don't know, conferences, discussion, but we know that at the core of the problem, there is also the question of the fundings, who gives the grants and who received them.
Thank you, Laurence. There's another question from the audience. Does cancel culture affect the type of films, TV shows being made? If so, how?
What is cancel culture?
Aha.
What is cancel culture?
So cancel culture is basically when you get called out on something and then you lose your job or get kicked out of something. I think there's no such thing as cancel culture. I'm a firm believer. It's called accountability.
Mm.
And that is what's happening now. People are being held accountable. You make, you sexually harass someone, you lose your job. You say things that are inappropriate on an ongoing basis. People are like, no, I'm fine with that. I don't think it's cancel culture. I think it's holding us to a better standard.
Does it affect the type of films, TV shows being made?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe
are they implying that people now want to be politically correct? So now they're trying not to visit some or at least explore some topics. I don't know if this is that's what is implied, because I heard it, so that's why I'm sharing it. I'm a bit like you, Melissa, about cancel culture, but I just feel that I don't know. One thing I know, people, the way some public figure in French are getting away with things with what they say, they will not be able to spend 2 minutes here. That's the only thing I can say.
And Yasmina, there's another question. What would you suggest for Americans, non-white Americans who would love to work in French cinema? Of course, be able to speak French, but do you recommend something else?
That's so funny. I had a meeting with someone at the beginning of the week, she's willing to learn French. I think that there's a lot of opportunities because I did have a meeting. French is spoken more outside of France than in France. People need to know that. I think 40% of the French speaker are actually in the African continent. And I am super confident that many projects will be coming from the continent. And it will be so easy to ask, for instance, an actor or an actress who's playing an African character to speak French with an African accent. Actually, we expect French people or to speak we expect artists to speak other dialect. Yeah, why not? I think it's happening as we speak.
And also, I think with the Netflix of the world, people are used to watching shows that are, not in English, and it's not like this, art film kind of thing. So it's becoming, more comfortable with the fact that some amazing content is being produced in German and French, in so many different languages. And we have to watch them if we want to see the great content.
So Williams acted in Alain Gomis' film Tape, Aujourd'hui, where he was, mostly non-speaking in the film, but he has his American accent. I think this was the last question. I'm sorry we could have a talk, I think, for 5 hours or one day about these issues. And I welcome back on stage Delphine Sel Alvarez for the conclusion word of conclusion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this discussion. I think you covered quite a lot of topics, unpacked a lot of things, and at the same time feeling that, you're also just scratching the surface. There's so many layers on these issues and so many perspectives as well. So there's a lot to change, obviously, and the road is long, but it looks like we've made progress as well. And so it's kind of exciting to hear Melissa and Yasmine talk about how things are changing, and you, Yassine, also kind of figuring out where you stand in all of this. I think it's very interesting, and I think your films are great, actually, and I think that's what people want to see, and that's why your films are made. So I just want to encourage everyone that's in a theater right now, if they want to come join us for the program of shorts. It's starting at 5:30. It's a great, really program of 3 shorts, and we're actually lucky to have with us the director of one of them, Blooming Dahlia, which is a really smart work. So Holy Fatma is here. She'll be here to introduce the film and also to do a short discussion afterwards, so you can make your way down the theater. Also at 7:30, we're showing Yassine's film, A Brighter Tomorrow, and I also encourage you to stick for that. And if you are calling in or live streaming for somewhere in New York, you have like, I think 2 hours to grab your Metro card and come to FIAF and see Yassine's films on the big screen. It's not distributed as of yet, and it's a US premiere of the film as well. So please do join us for that. And we are continuing the program tomorrow, of course, starting at 2 o'clock. We also are kicking off the online portion of Burning Brighter online tomorrow evening. And that program includes a film that Laurence produced, Leave, which is a lovely documentary on immigrations and stories of immigrations. So I hope you'll join us for that as well, in person and online. So without further ado, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.